I didn't want Amanda coming after me later.
That's fair. That's great that that's how the recording will start. So I want to begin with kind of an overview of the book of Acts, and we'll see if we actually get into chapter 1 much today, or if we just kind of have a conversation about the overview. So that'll kind of be dictated by how the conversation goes, okay? So first of all, if you saw my post on Facebook, on the Dust page and stuff about what we're talking about today, then you know that what my goal is, you know what my direction I'm going to take the conversation in. But what I want you to do is maybe answer or reflect how you have in the past been taught or read the book of Acts. Like if you had to set the scene for someone of what the book of Acts is, how would you do that? Morning, Darnell and Sarah. So no one has thought about the book of Acts at all?
I do. I was waiting because I tend to talk a lot, so I was waiting to get some chance to talk. I know, shocking. And so I guess my thought is, what I always heard was it was like the model for the modern Christian church. Okay. I know that's like an overview also, but like, you know, that if we were to study Acts 2 church, we would see how the modern Christian church should behave, and which included not leaving anyone to be hungry, making sure everyone within the church was cared for properly.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Anybody else?
I think it's also kind of the story of how, I guess one could say, how the Great Commission came about, and how the idea of who was included kept getting expanded in the early church, and how the church had to wrestle with that.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Wade. Anybody else? I'll throw one out that I've heard a lot. It's just, this is the story of the beginning of Christianity in a lot of ways, right? That it's the beginning of the church. It's the story of how the church gets started, and it's an overview of that is often how I've heard it taught. Any thoughts? Yeah, Dan.
I've often heard it taught like this is how when the believers received the Holy Spirit, and how the Holy Spirit began to work through people and spread the word.
Awesome. Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts? Abby, you don't have any thoughts? I imagine you have so many thoughts, just maybe no thoughts on Acts, right? All right, well, here's what I want us to consider, is that most of us have typically only heard the book of Acts taught through the lens of a more like affluent suburban view or lens or cultural understanding. And so Acts 2 becomes a church plant movement. Acts 2 becomes the giving of the Holy Spirit. Acts in general becomes reinforcement for the way that we should do church, though shaped into our own lens and understanding as affluent suburbanites tends to, right? But we have to remember that, well, let me ask you this, instead of me giving that information, let me just hear if you have any thoughts on this. And I realize that we're a little quiet today, folks. I don't know if you didn't get your coffee or what's going on, but and Tana and Mitch are frozen in permanent smiling. Your face is gonna freeze that way if you keep that up, folks. So what is the setting leading into Acts? Like where, like, and I don't mean just like where did the Gospels end and where does Acts begin, but I mean the cultural setting. What is going on in the world right there and then when Acts begins? Like what's the setup? Like imagine if you watched The Sound of Music and had no idea that it was World War II, right? Like you need to know some of what's going on in order for the impact of the story to matter. So when we just read the book of Acts and separate it from what's going on in the world, we turn it into a mega church. We turn it into a huge different thing. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that a mega church is bad. I'm just saying that I'm just saying that that isn't what the book of Acts is trying to get us to. So what's the setting?
So the church is being, basically they're trying to find all the Christians and kill them.
Okay. Thank you. Who did you say was doing that? I'm sorry.
The Romans.
Yep. Okay.
Well, I believe it at the time that there was a famine that was taking place as well.
Okay. So what do you imagine the emotion is going on? Like we have the apostles. What's going on with them? What are their feelings? What are their emotions? How long after the resurrection was the book of Acts? That's a great question, Craig. Anyone know? Here's a little tip for a lot of you who maybe haven't read the book of Acts in a while.
Well, wasn't it, Passover, Jesus was crucified over Passover, so the Holy Spirit came over Shavuot, so it was 50 days later when this whole thing started.
Yes, but that's chapter 2. Jesus makes an appearance in Acts. A lot of Christians don't even realize that, and that's in Acts 1. Jesus is actually in the book of Acts, like considered present in the book of Acts. Did you know that? I know.
I guess one of the things I was going to say is I think that there was a lot of confusion among the apostles on what they were supposed to do now. Okay, so what are we supposed to do? What's going on? And I think Jesus's appearance to them was to solidify what they were supposed to do now. What are we supposed to do out here?
Yep, I certainly agree. So let me, unless anyone else has an input onto the setting, let me give a kind of a coverage.
I was just going to say that in essence, they were waiting for their orders, like, to dovetail what Mitch said. They're waiting for their orders, what they were about to do. And I don't think they had great direction. And also in the meantime, they were trying to hide from those that were trying to kill them. So I think obviously the name of Acts came from the Acts of the Apostle. So it was really, I would say, a launching pad in many ways. And that's probably, how a lot of the modern church, came to believe that, it was, a roadmap. But I think they were hiding and really just didn't know what they should be doing next, like Mitch said. So, but that doesn't mean that that's the entirety of Acts. That's obviously just how it started off.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts? So let me give you a little bit of a scenario, and please interject, because I would love for us as a community to form this thought, not just me teaching it, right? Like, so like if I say something that triggers or brings something to mind for you, interrupt me, because I would rather hear it in your voice than mine. Okay? So in this picture, Jesus was just recently crucified, just within a matter of weeks prior, right? His crucifixion was at the hands of Romans. Romans were ruling the world at the time. They were the big empire. They were the oppressor. They were the ones that were going out, and we get Pax Romano through that, right? Where it's peace through conquering, not peace through mercy, but peace through conquering. And so here is Rome. They have already conquered Jerusalem and Israel. And so Israel is living under the thumb of Rome. Jesus, who had become a political figure. Now, why do you think I say that Jesus became a political figure? What makes me think that Jesus became a political figure? Because a lot of times people want to leave that out. Go ahead, Andrew. Let me hear it.
Because he was killed by the state.
Because he was killed by the state. And not only killed by the state, what was his title? What was the little banner underneath his crucifixion that scrolled on CNN?
King of the Jews.
Yes. He was named king, right? So he was killed by the state for being a potential threat to the throne of Caesar. Right? We're all feeling that? And so here is the scene of Israel or Jerusalem and Jesus. And so the people that follow Jesus, the people that were convinced that Jesus was indeed, or still is indeed, Messiah, and therefore potentially King of the Jews, though that wouldn't be the title that would be given, now they are under threat. They're fearing for their lives, as David and Wade mentioned. They're fearing for their lives and their well-being because Jesus just was killed for being a political figure that was at some level a threat to Rome. Rome, wanting to keep their thumb on Israel and the Jews, kills this upstart, right? Kills them. Kills Jesus because they're afraid of the potential that Jesus could create. Is that making sense so far? Any thoughts about this yet? Does that help begin to change or shape what you're thinking for the book of Acts? So let me ask you this question. So all of you be ready to unmute your mics and talk. I really want input. How does that lens, why does that matter for us when we read the book of Acts? By me saying unmute your mics, I meant like, yeah. Thanks, Alicia Kay. What do you think?
Yeah, something that I forgot. What was the question again?
That why is that important to understand as the lead-in for the book of Acts? How does that affect the way we read the book of Acts?
I mean, well, you have to understand context for everything.
Absolutely. So how does this context begin to shape what the book of Acts' point might be, do you think? And guessing is fine right now.
Well, the main difference for me is the proximity. I mean, I think I thought that there was space between the death of Jesus and the whole Acts thing happening. So I would think that anything that happens in Acts is a little more reactive than I would have previously thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So all the people, like that's fresh for all the people in Acts.
Yep, the story picks up immediately after Jesus's death and his resurrection, and this is before he ascends. In fact, in Acts 1 is where Jesus actually ascends to heaven. So Jesus is still present, and then in Acts 1 ascends.
Yeah.
I think it makes everything that much more like revolutionary. When you were asking in the beginning, like how have people traditionally understood the Book of Acts of it, and I think Tally touched on it, and somebody else touched on it too. That it was like it's like the church planting book, like it's all about how we gather, and yes, lots of mega churches use it, and so it's kind of like I was trying to think through my impression of it, and it's like very touchy-feely, like let's all break bread together, and whereas like it was much more revolutionary what they were doing, and much more, I can't think of a better word, of a different word, but like political than what we would maybe want to say today. So to me, if you're really kind of taking that lens at it, it can change how we interpret tons of the passages in that book.
Absolutely.
I also feel like it is, rather than the story of something big and grand, it's the story of something relatively small. I mean, because I think sometimes we read it like, oh, well, we just hear about the leaders and the highlights of this community, but it's not like the community was that much bigger than that which we hear about. I think of reading kind of documentary histories or like oral histories, and that's what it feels like more. It's like, well, we're going to talk to the few people that were there at the start of this movement. I think the other thing that strikes me is we often think of it as the beginning of the Christian church, but it's really, it's not like the folks in Acts. I mean, the whole issue is that they consider them that they're Jewish, and then trying to figure out like, okay, so are we a Jewish movement that people need to become Jewish to join the movement? Or are we a movement that's kind of coming out of that? So it's almost like a political party, where you have a political party that's that there's part of the political party that's going in one direction, but for now they're still considered part of a larger party. So, like how we can have Bernie Sanders running as a Democrat, but say I'm a democratic socialist, or the Tea Party movement and the Republicans, where, I see it more like that, where what you need to think of in terms of the Jewish Messiah is now changing, because you've got this small group within it that, they're still being persecuted as Jews, but now they don't even have the same ideas as the rest of Judaism in terms of the Messiah.
Sure. Thank you.
Another thing for me is that the death of the leader, Jesus, didn't kill the movement. All right, so basically Rome comes in, they feel like, well, the death of the leader, that's going to spell the end of the movement, which in reality, it was just the opposite. It actually ushered the kingdom into Rome, whether they wanted it there or not.
Yeah.
So it actually expanded the kingdom instead of thwarting the kingdom.
Yep.
Well, and it's important to remember that that's a playbook that empire has continually gone back to. I mean, we don't have to look very far back in history to see, actually, if you think about it, 3, MLK, Malcolm X, and then Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, because he was a politician that was who was very involved with the movement and trying to move things along. So,
Yep.
sorry.
Sarah?
I was just gonna say that, like, you know, when they're gathering in the upper room, it just kind of, instead of just picturing like, oh, they're just sad and like maybe overwhelmed and figuring out what to do next, but it just adds like a whole element of fear and stress and, you know, putting myself like in their shoes, like what the climate would have been a little bit more nuanced and difficult than just like, oh, we're sad and without direction. And even like thinking about them speaking to the crowds and 3,000 people being baptized, instead of it just being a happy gathering, like it just makes me wonder, well, what courage it would have taken to like let that many people gather, and like what would that have looked like, and like it would have been scary to like, you know, because like if authorities had figured out that they were gathering, you know, they're just like a lot of element, I think, of like fear and courage that would be a part of it, knowing the background.
Absolutely. Right. Like think about this. So thank you, Sarah. That leads me kind of into some of this, right? Is that in Acts 1, Jesus tells them to do what?
Go and make disciples.
Nope. What does he say in Acts 1?
Be my witness and tell people about me everywhere.
So he says, hold on, let me find it.
Wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. In a few days, you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit.
Yep. So one of the things that we see is that Jesus is like not letting them do what? Hide. Right? Like they're scared to death. Jesus was just brutally murdered by the state. Does that feel like we can relate at all to modern stories? Like Jesus is just innocent, unarmed man is just lynched by the state. Right? Let's not get confused here. A cross in first century was equivalent to lynching. So Jesus is lynched by the state and by state authorities. And now he says, when he appears to his disciples, I want you to go to Jerusalem. I want you to go into the temple. I want you to be in the temple on a regular basis. I don't want you to leave Jerusalem until I tell you. And there's no more public place that a political movement would take place, a revolution, as Tana said, a revolutionary group would take place than in Jerusalem, which means it's probably the most anticipated and highly watched area. And Jesus is like, not only do I want you to go and hold and keep being public, I want you to make a protest. I want you to stand up in front of all these people and declare God's authority, not Caesar's. What? Right? On Shavuot in Acts 2, the day that celebrates God becoming officially king by giving all the laws to Israel, right? We do get that, right? That a king gives the law. So when Israel crosses the Red Sea, they declare God to be king. Just a matter of days later, they're standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, and God says, here is the laws for my kingdom. And on the day that they're celebrating God as king, Jesus is like, you need to get up and you need to speak. And you need to declare that God is king and Caesar is not. And so they hold a protest. And on that day of protest, 3,000 people join the protest. Do you see that equivalency at all? Any thoughts about that? No thoughts? So when we read the book of Acts, we need to be reading it from a place of understanding that Jesus has called his disciples to take the story of a lynched man and use it as power to overthrow an oppressive empire, to use it as fuel, to use it as motivation to say, we will no longer stand by and allow Caesar to control us, to put us in fear, to force us to hide, to force us to not be a free people. And instead, we are going to usurp Caesar's authority. And the book of Acts is the story of that. Does that sound plausible? I'm not asking you to say that you're convinced. I'm asking you, does that sound plausible? If we read it that way, how do stories change, such as the Ethiopian eunuch? Now, we just talked about it, and I think it's important that we don't dismiss the things that we've already talked about it. But the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch, and conversion might be rough to say because it seems like he's already Jewish, but his experience, why is that powerful? Why is that with this lens? How does that add another element to the story of the Ethiopian eunuch?
Because he was already someone in a somewhat position of power, as he was person in the court of the person.
Yeah.
Ethiopian.
Yeah, Dan nailed it. Why do you imagine that a few of the first mentioned conversions are what? Who's the other conversion we already talked about as well? And
The centurion.
The centurion, who is what?
Also in a position of power.
Yeah, within Rome, right? Who is the book of Acts written to? Anyone?
A Roman leader?
Named?
Theophilus.
Yeah. So here we have a book written to someone in authority and power within Rome. We have the first two convert. No wonder they lead with this, right? Like when Luke is sending this, no wonder he leads with this when he's writing this letter to a Roman authority. He leads with the first two converts being people of power in different governments, right? So how does this begin to manipulate? In Acts 2, when we talk about it being the giving of the Holy Spirit, that totally reduces this picture. Acts 2 is the start of the revolution. Acts 2 is the moment that Israel and God is declaring the Exodus is starting. Right? When we think about the story of the Exodus, what is that about? How would you describe the book of Exodus based on what we're talking about right now? A story of what? Craig said that that the word petrified means frozen. The fear in Acts wasn't frozen. That's good. Come on, peeps. Wake up, shake off this log. Exodus. How would we describe the book of Exodus in light of this?
It was the exodus of the people of Israel from oppression to find their home. the country, their land, and
Mhm.
have their own place that belonged to them where they weren't oppressed anymore.
Yes, that is a great start. What else?
David just went.
Victory! What else?
A display of God's authority usurping human authority.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything more?
Sort of has to be a deconstruction of what you had previously been under, and a sort of construction from the base up of the new laws, the new ways of living. So
Yes.
that's God.
All right, this is worth waiting for. All right, I'll give you guys that. This is worth me sitting here quietly waiting. Well, not quietly. I keep prompting you all. Keep going. Someone add to that. That's beautiful. We're getting there. That's good stuff.
Say Exodus is also an example of an oppressed people taking back their power.
Yes. Keep going. This is good. I'd prefer if we could get a little bit faster pace, but you know. Israel didn't just sneak out of Egypt, right? They didn't like sneak out. You know, it wasn't the whole if you don't like it, move, right? What did they do? What did God do? What did Moses do and Aaron do? Go ahead, Tom.
I was just drawing parallels to today and other periods in which protest was sort of the language of people who were being oppressed, and I was thinking of Exodus as like a pretty like massive protest, and then it struck me that a lot of times today where people are always like, well, if you would just, you just need to get your message across in the right way, and you need to go through the proper channels. And it was just occurring to me that like Moses went to Pharaoh how many times?
Mm-hmm.
And was like, let my people go. And like, that's like
he knelt
going through the proper channels.
Moses several times knelt for the national anthem.
Right.
And wasn't heard. And then what happens? Go ahead, Sarah.
Abby just wanted to share that he went 7 times. Is that even right?
You know what? It might be. I never counted. But if it is right, that's brilliant, Abby. And if it isn't right, it's still a great guess. I like the number 7. So let's just look at it this way. Okay, you ready? Moses knelt during the national anthem a handful of times. Everyone's mad. Then God decides to loot and riot Egypt. He starts breaking the income by killing cattle. He overwhelms the transportation system, the Nile, by making it turn to blood. God loots and riots in Egypt until it forces Pharaoh to change the status of the Israelites. Y'all can tweet that because that's some real stuff right there. God loots and riots the oppressive regime in order to get Israel freed. How does God start? God starts first by sending Moses through the proper channels, as Tana said, doing a peaceful protest and asking for rights, asking for freedom, asking for the things that should be asked for. And instead, Pharaoh ignores it. Pharaoh laughs at him. Pharaoh kicks him out of the court. And then God says, you did not hear my peaceful protest?
And he makes things worse at first, right? And then the other Israelites are like, why are you peacefully protesting? You just made things worse for us. We don't even know how to like feel about this.
Yes.
And then he increases their labor.
It does. Absolutely. Pharaoh doubles down. Pharaoh shows his true colors. Pharaoh shows up at peaceful protest in military garb. I mean, I don't know if you're picking up what I'm trying to do here. I'm being a little, I'm being kind of coy.
Yeah, that's you. The thing about this is these are things I'd kind of thought about before, like, oh, this is kind of like this. But when you're laying it all out like this right now, I'm just like, how do we not see these protests as like inherently theologically sound? Like it's like God gave a blueprint in the book of Exodus.
Yep. And Craig mentioned, and he's right, Moses didn't even want to kneel at first. Right? Like, that's powerful to even think about. Thank you, Craig, for saying that. I hadn't considered that, right? Like, Moses is like thinking of all the reasons, his job, his safety, what will people say about him because he has, he doesn't speak well or he doesn't speak good. And like all of this. And then finally, when Moses gets up the urge, you know why? Because he goes and talks to Aaron and Aaron encourages him. And so then he goes to Pharaoh and goes through the proper channels. Look, this is all so important for us when we begin to read the book of Acts. This is what the story of Exodus was to Israel. So when they imagined that there was going to be another Exodus, if they truly bought into this moment, that this is a Mount Sinai moment, this is another Exodus moment, like we see earlier in Luke, right? Luke wrote both Luke and Acts. And in Luke, during the Mount of Transfiguration scene, what does Moses say to Jesus? Let's go, my people of the text. What does Moses say to Jesus? We do a disservice to it because we put it in English instead of seeing the original Greek word. Moses says, go and perform the departure in Jerusalem. And what is the Greek word for departure?
Exodus?
Exodus. Well, Exodus, but right? Go and perform the Exodus in Jerusalem. Now, do you think when Jesus heard that, do you think when the handful of disciples that were with him on the Mount of Transfiguration heard that they thought, oh, Moses is telling Jesus to go and invite the Holy Spirit? Do you think that they thought Moses was telling Jesus to go and, don't stir the pot? When they heard, with the setting we just gave, Moses tells Jesus, go and perform the Exodus in Jerusalem. What do you think that the disciples imagined was about to happen?
Nothing short of complete liberation and freedom.
Yes. Nothing short of that. Yes. Well said, Dan. Like, that's a perfect statement. Nothing short of liberation. At all costs. At all costs. And it begins shockingly, differently than it did in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, I am so sorry, my neighbor decided to start running a something loud. But now I'm distracted, sorry. But instead of Moses getting the chance to stand before Pharaoh, we have, shut up, Craig. Instead of Moses getting to stand before Pharaoh, we have Jesus lynched by Caesar. Like, empire has learned. Empire has evolved. Empire has figured out that you don't let the savior stand before the king or Pharaoh or Caesar and demand things. You lynch them before they have a chance. And so instead, what happens? Instead of it being one person leading, right, which we see Moses get in trouble from by Jethro and some other folks, because he was the one person leading, instead it becomes what? How would you describe Black Lives Matter? Name the person that runs Black Lives Matter. Hurry up, name them. Name the person. You can't. So what happens? What happens when you kill the leader? When you start killing the people, what happens?
You have a whole movement instead.
Yes, it's a movement. And so in this moment, when Jesus is lynched, the people become the leader. Spot on, Craig, right? And now Jesus is saying, has told the disciples, he has trained them to do what? This goes back to your answer, Wade, earlier. How does Jesus ensure that this becomes a movement? By making disciples. Right? Now, we might not think of ourselves as disciples of different movements, because that's a word that's both a little bit archaic to use, but also we tend to only use it for religious reasons. I really hope you all can still hear me with that noise in the background. I apologize. And it's so distracting to me, though. I'm sorry. I'm like distracted by it. So in this picture, we have Jesus teaching them how to disciple people in order to ensure that the message in the movement remains well-founded, that it doesn't become so redistributed and repackaged that it becomes confusing, that it becomes a problem, but instead teach people these ways. Teach them all the things that I've commanded you. Empower everyone. Right? If you could trace your discipleship, just imagine this for a moment, because how cool would this frickin' be? If he is running every single possible piece of equipment in that frickin' garage. If you could imagine this, imagine if you could trace your discipleship all the way back through one person at a time, like a genealogy, all the way back to Jesus. Like, imagine if the church stuck with discipleship in such a way that every generation passed it on. So like those of you that are sitting here that I am currently discipling or have discipled in the past, when you pass that on, you're creating a legacy and generations of thinking that are influenced by these teachings. And that changes the world. Not by one person in front of a huge church teaching, but the people of the church being empowered. That's why it's so important that when we do it, Dusk is so significant, because I want you to be the voice, not me. We don't need another leader. We need empowered people. Jesus, in this beginning of the book of Acts, is how do we empower the people to change the entire world, to overthrow oppressors, to overthrow kingdoms, to overthrow empires, all of that. How do we do that? So, what are your thoughts?
Just thinking about, like, you know, I think like the idea of having big churches and all that comes from a good place because everybody believes what they believe and they want as many people to hear it. And there's that desperation and that like quantity equal success as opposed to the quality, because one deeply changed life is going to have a greater impact. And it also makes me just think of parenting too, that like, you know, as I raise Abby and Meadow, like, and teach them or disciple them and guiding them, like the idea of teaching them not just what to do, but the why we do what we do, so that when I'm out of the picture, or like when they like launch into their adulthood, then they have that on their own. It's not that they're going to be constantly dependent on me, or, you know, hopefully not like revolting against me, but they have it like ingrained in them, in themselves. And I think it's like very hard in Western culture to choose the less glamorous, hard, slow, messy, painful work of loving the people right around you and discipling one person and the time that it takes. But the impact, I think, and I believe, is like generational. Yeah. Like, I believe that lives can like change like families for generations, and we are all impacting people in our circle by being the voice. Because I don't know, it's just, but it's not always glamorous. No. It's just not. It's not about like having a flashy name or a blog and how many followers and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that stuff can be great and messages can get across and things like that, but there's deep change that happens. Like, I've heard it referred to as like the upside down kingdom of God. Like, everything's backwards, like going small instead of going big.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Any other thoughts, folks? Craig says, admit that it's okay to be afraid and don't let the fear petrify you. Let the fear inspire you, and recognize that there are a lot of ways to act. Yeah, absolutely. And this is so important because here's one thing, you know, I laid pretty heavy on making correlations and metaphors for the parallel of the Exodus and what we see going on today. But I want to be very, very clear here. You don't need to be on the front line of a protest to be impacting the system. We all bring different skill sets. We all bring different passions and interests. We all bring different gifts to the table. The only danger I would say that we have is sheer silence. Don't let yourself in your fear be relegated to silence. That's it. And if you feel motivated or empowered to do more, then do more. But there is not a who is doing it the best or who is doing it whatever. If all of us decide to just move from silence to a place beyond silence, the world would change. So I just want you to all keep that in mind, that there isn't a singular expression of how we do faith, that how we do living out that faith in the community, how we do that living out of faith in the midst of some of the chaos and everything that exists. So I just think that that's really something important to make sure that we add. Thank you, Craig, for triggering that in my mind. And I really want to stop using the word trigger. it just seems really horrible at this time of life. Tana, did you have something?
Yeah, can I add to what you're saying?
Cutie! Sorry, not you, Tana. I was talking to Darnell and Sarah. Hi!
Fine. I just want to kind of add to what you're saying about like the different ways to be in the moment, kind of a thing. Because this is something I've thought about a lot because, especially because, so for example, everyone here knows, you know, Don and Lee went out and put their bodies on the line literally 2 weekends ago during a protest. And I was there, but I didn't do what they did. Stuff happened. I ran with the crowd and Don went towards the police, and I had a very terrified moment of wondering. I was petrified for a little bit because I was just standing there going, I have no idea what to do right now. And I ultimately decided that Don might need me to bail him out of jail. So I went the opposite direction. And that has been something I've struggled with, because I think sometimes we have this idea that like, if you're not willing to do like the all out thing, then you're not doing the right thing. Like that's not an okay thing. And I had thought about, in less revolutionary ways, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I should use my skills and time and everything to better society. And one of them is like kind of obvious through my job. I mean, I have grant writing skills, and so and philanthropy is very, very white. And so right now I'm using my skills to get money for programs that are led by people of color and conducted in communities of color to try to change all of the stuff that we're seeing right now, right? So like that's one way, but that's also like my job, you know? So I started thinking more, and for me, what I ultimately decided is that I tend to be more of a kind of a helper. I'm not the kind that's it would take a lot of self-talk for me to do what Don did. Anyway, sorry, I'm beginning to ramble. The the long and short of it is, spend some time like really thinking about how you can be effective, and it doesn't have to be the like the frontline thing. And for me, what I've decided is I'm going to take a first aid class, and if something like this happens again, I want to be one of those people that's available to help heal people in the moment. So that's something that I thought about. So I just wanted to kind of share that. And also, if anyone's interested, I had shared on Facebook a little while back, it was something called like 28 ways to be in the movement if you're not on the streets. And it has like all these other things that are very, very needed. So
awesome. Would you mind sharing that in the chat, please? And maybe even in the Facebook group? If you could do it both places, that would be awesome. Yeah, and actually, thank you, Tana, for doing that, saying that, because what I really would like for all of you to start thinking about this week is ways that you can participate. And I'm not going to assume that your participation is just within the Black Lives Matter movement or the protests and stuff against, police brutality or what have you. But in other areas also that you're passionate, whether it be, I mean, this is Pride Month, whether it be LGBTQIA plus rights and equality. We just found out that transgender folks are going to lose equal access to healthcare. So maybe that's something that you want to be speaking up more about. So there's a lot of things that we can be participating in and doing. So I want you to think about what are some of the ways that we can do that. Now, I also want you to do me another favor. All right, you guys ready? First of all, I'm gonna do like I'm gonna ask you to do what the Israelites did. What did the Israelites do at the foot of Mount Sinai? Come on, people. Glenn, do you know?
Circumcision. Huh.
Circumcision? No, I'm not asking you to be circumcised. Oh,
No.
I mean, if that's what you want to do, I'm not going to stop you.
You know.
But I'm not asking you to do that before next week. Glenn, I love you so much. Oh, that made me lightheaded. Oh, no pun intended. Oh, that was terrible. Don, what are you doing? Censor yourself. All right. Thank you, Alicia K. All right. What I want you to do, well, here's what Israel did at the foot of Mount Sinai. Before God gave Torah, Israel said, whatever you're about to say, we'll do. Remember that? Of course you all remember that. So that's what I want you to do right now. Just think it. Don, whatever you're about to say, we'll do. And you just
my experience, that is never a good idea.
Tana, you know the role of the wife. It's to be silent and submit.
Yeah, okay.
For those of you that might be listening to this at a later time and don't know our theology, we do not stand by that statement. All right, so I want you all to read Acts chapter 1. And I want you to read it through this lens and just try to imagine the emotions, the feelings, the fear, and what is facing these people, these apostles and the handful of disciples that are left over. Not only, I mean, one of the most horrifying persons might be Matthias. Why do you think Matthias might be the most terrified person? According to Acts 1.
Spot.
What's that?
He took a dead man's spot.
Yeah, he's taking a dead man's spot and moving up from being in the background to all of a sudden he's in the front lines because someone rolled some lots and he's the one that got stuck with it, right? Like he goes from nobody to the front lines. And maybe that's what you're being asked to do. Maybe that's the things that you're facing. Like has circumstances, I almost said circumcised, has circumstances shifted in your life that now the lot has been cast and you're being asked. Version suggestion. Craig, I love the NASB or the NRSV, but really any translation outside of a paraphrase, I would say is good. And paraphrases tend to be the NLT, the Message, and ones like that.
I was just about to ask that.
Yeah, because those tend to change the language to fit a modern understanding, but that modern understanding is a white modern understanding as opposed to leaving it in its ethnic setting.
So you said NASV or NRSV?
Close. NASB as in
As in Bravo?
Yes. I like bonnet better, but you go with Bravo. Do what you want. But I want you to read Acts 1, and I want you to read it through this lens so that next week, I would love for us to crowdsource the teaching more than what we did today. I want you to start really thinking about this in a manner of, what is this text? And I want you to try to feel the emotion in it. This is not, like we make Acts like this joyous celebratory book. And I think it's one of the hardest passages because it is telling a people that who just saw their leader get lynched, I now want you to not be silent and hide. I want you to go right into the teeth of empire and start a revolution. And to ask a minority group to do that, well, we see that. That feels real. So I also want you to read it from the perspective of that, but also the perspective as, for most of us sitting here, we sit in a seat of power and privilege. Some of us more, some of us less, whether it be because of gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, what have you. We might be more or less privileged and in power. And I want you to think, how, as a person of power, do we read this and critique ourselves and the things we participate in? Right? I imagine after Cornelius's conversion, as a Roman centurion, he had a lot of tough decisions to make about what it looks like to move from God-fear to one of the faithful, and what that means by participating in a system of oppression.
Hey, Don, can you repeat what you said? Consider how, as a person with power, what did you say?
Consider as a person with power how acts might critique you and critique what you participate in and how you've contributed to the things that are now people need to start a revolution to overcome.
Thank you.
All right. Any last questions or thoughts? Questions about the homework assignment that you all have agreed to do before you even heard me say it? Just remember that.
I just want to add this, because this conversation is making me think a lot about James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree. I know we've recommended it in the past, and I also know that there is a huge trend of white people looking for books to read right now. And there's obviously a lot of great ones out there, and I'm reading some of them. But from a theological standpoint, that book is just amazing, and it really helps put I think it really helps kind of put this book of Acts in perspective as well.
I think so too. I just want to kind of give a clear warning. It does not hold back, and it is graphic.
Yeah.
There is no sugarcoating happening in that book. It is straight up bitter chocolate. And if you would like a digital copy of it, I can procure it for you. I was
just going to ask, how is everybody reading their books or accessing those?
With my iPad.
Because I have an Amazon Kindle Fire, but I never use it, so I don't really know how most people are getting all their books to read.
If you have an Amazon Kindle, I can send you books that I already have a copy of. They're or you can go to the Dropbox thing that's in the email every week that we send out.
Yeah. I've never used that with the Kindle Fire. I am the worst with technology. I prefer real books, so I never really got into how that worked.
Yeah, just you always want to download the MOBI file from any folder.
Don?
Yes.
Does that also work on like a regular Kindle? Because I've had them on my iPad that you've given us.
Yeah.
But I want to read them on my Kindle, not my iPad.
Yep. So same thing. I'll send you the Mobi file.
Okay.
And then you just plug in your Kindle into whatever computer you downloaded that to, and just transfer it.
Okay. Already you're above my pay grade, but we'll talk about it another time.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, anybody that needs help getting one of the digital books onto your device, message me or call me during the week, and I will help you get it there.
Thanks, Don.
Of course.
Also, Craig mentioned in chat, at least I think this is the same thing. The library has a digital app that you can download free books through.
A lot of the recommended books like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist, a lot of those the libraries copy. They've got multiple copies, but the wait list for each copy is about 10 users deep right now.
Yeah, I was just going to add that.
Just a warning. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I imagine The Cross and the Lynching Tree doesn't have quite the waiting list.
Probably not.
Although there's probably also not as many copies available.
They do not have that in their Overdrive subscription at the Toledo Lucas County Public Library right now.
All right. Well, reach out to me and I will get it in whatever format you need. I just ask that any book I share with you, I bought them. And so please do not share them on the internet or with a whole slew of people, because it probably has my name embedded in the code somewhere, and I do not want to get in any kind of trouble for piracy. I mean, as cool as it would be to know that you have a pastor who plays poker and is also a pirate, there's alliteration for you right there, Pastor.
I'm glad you made a pirate joke because I really wanted to.
Go for it. Well,
no, you already made the connection.
Fair enough. All right. So we all agreed that we're going to read Acts 1 through that lens. If you need a copy of The Cross and the Lynching Tree, let me know. I have a lot of other books as well that you could read. I will also let you know that on June 18th, I will be part of a panel speaking about anti-racism in the church. And I will make sure that as that information becomes available, that I get it to you. I'll post it on the Facebook page as well as in the Facebook group. So I'd encourage you to check that out. It is free to attend. It's a webinar. And I believe, and Chris Sanchez will be there. So if you haven't seen Chris in a while, he'll be one of the panel members as well. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. Yeah, Quentin. Quentin, go ahead.
All right. I mean, just to speak briefly, like this whole thing, like it kind of reminded me of what happened 2 Saturdays ago when I made my peace walk at the Museum of Art, where a lot of the people that showed up for the protest was a significant amount of things that's been going on, like I said, Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ movement. There was some people who was representing nurses. There was some people representing autism. There was some people that was supporting atheism. So, like, it was going through this whole melting pot of a movement where,
Oh no, Quentin, we lost you.
It's being weird, but
You're back.
can you hear me?
Yep, we got you now.
All right, cool. All right, so anyway, so for seeing this big melting pot going on, I think we're just here to get, because we deserve peace.
We do.
And I don't think anyone will say otherwise, because like we're now at the moment where equality matters, like a lot more essential than it is like just justice or honor or anything of that adjective. Peace plays a very essential role when it comes down to try to find all these things. You have to find that inner peace to find that ultimate answer to what we need. So, so with that being said, I could go plug this. I'm doing another peace walk this coming Saturday on the 20th, and we're meeting up around 12 noon. We're gonna have like a little speech after 1 o'clock. Then we're just gonna, walk around in peaceful protest around OSN for an hour or two. So whatever, like anyone gets tired. So if anyone wants to show up, the information is going to be coming out like later this afternoon, because right now I'm just doing the graphic design and all.
That's amazing, Quentin. Would you be willing to, when that comes out, to make sure that that's sent to the Facebook group?
I'd love to.
Awesome. Please do that. And I'd encourage folks to go support Quentin in this, but also go and be a part of a walk and a peaceful march and expression of desire for peace and equality for people, right? So thank you, Quentin. Yeah, please keep us updated. We'll try and get that out. Depending on what time you get everything figured out and posted, Tana might be able to get that in the email to the group as well. But we'll post it on the Facebook page too. So we'll try and get the word out as best we can.
Don?
Yes.
Yes. I haven't had a Bible but my husband has this Bible. It's called the Thompson Chain Reference Bible.
Yep.
Is that a good Bible?
It is. It when it came out, it was considered the best Bible of its day. Right. It is a little bit difficult to read now because the English it uses, the way it is translated, is a little bit rough to read. But it's not going to harm you to read it, but it might be a little harder to understand and follow it.
So what Bible would you suggest?
The NASB or the NRSV, and I'll text you those.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, friends, I'm going to stop the recording